You're good to go.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Mike Barnett. I serve as Academic Director of the Rutgers Institute for Corporate Social Innovation, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the last, but certainly not least, session in our inaugural QUASI seminar series. These seminars are designed as debates on important topics related to social innovation, but our aim isn't to convince you that a certain perspective or answer is correct. We're not here to crown winners, as tempting as that may be. Instead, we want to enrich and refine the research questions that scholars use when studying these topics. As editors, reviewers, readers, writers, and teachers of the material underlying these debates, we know all too well that too much of the literature focuses on uninteresting questions that only rehash and rename established ideas. It's our sincere hope that by pointing out what's known on all sides of a debate in very pointed and direct ways, that we can drive researchers to produce sharper advances in our understanding of how to help business better serve society. Today, we debate the question, can we adequately assess corporate reputation? Answering in the affirmative, we've got Florida's finest, which admittedly, that's not really that high of a bar. We've got Bill Newburry. Countering in the negative, he's the proud namesake of serial killers, anti-government ranchers, and humongous professional wrestlers. Talking about John Bundy. And to clarify all those contingencies, at the wheel, we've got the pride of Mobile, Naomi Gardberg. Finally, moderating this mess. He's mighty, just letting it all hang out. He's David Deephouse. All right. Each in turn will argue their position. As they do so, please stay muted and post any questions or comments in the chat box. When we get to David, he'll synthesize and extend the arguments, and he'll offer his own perspective. The open discussion will occur after all four of our presenters have spoken, in the half hour or so that remains thereafter. So let's get the party started. Over to you. Who are we going to first? It's Bill. I got David written here. Bill, please.
You guys can see that?
Yep.
Very good. Okay, so thank you for organizing this session, Matt. Very happy to be here. I'm very excited to be with my co-panelists, and and this has been a great series you organized. And so here, my job today is to answer the question, can we adequately assess corporate reputation? And I'm going to start by quoting that fantastic hero of yesteryear, Duke Caboon from Toy Story 4, and he basically quotes, yes, we Canada. And so we'll come back to why that later. So I'm going to talk a little bit just quickly, in my short presentation, what is corporate reputation? And then the second part, what I think is the crux of the question is, what do we mean by adequate? Which I think all of the speakers are going to take a different take on that. Then we'll talk a little bit about reputation in research, reputation in practice. Then I want to talk a little bit about the problem of context and how I feel maybe the field can move forward. And so first of all, so what is corporate reputation? For this audience, I think most people have read many papers on this topic, and and seeing that there's lots of different definitions out there. I took one from my paper with David and Abraham Soleimani, where we talked about corporate reputation represents the evaluation of a firm by its stakeholders. And so it's basically, it's how the stakeholders think of a firm. So it's not something that's physical, like a table or a chair, but it's a perceptual measure. And these stakeholders basically need to compare the firm's behavior to the behavior of other firms and their instrumental and normative expectations for behavior. So stakeholders think, they have expectations of what the firm's going to do, and they're going to look and see, does this firm meet them relative to other firms in their environment that they're operating. And so here we see reputation is perceptual, and it's based on stakeholder perceptions compared to some normative expectations. So the second part I mentioned, we have to think about, when we talk about reputation, what does it mean to be adequate? Here we get to Duke Caboon. I looked, definitions of what does adequate mean when preparing, and basically they all talk about, enough or satisfactory for a particular purpose. So Duke Caboon, if you've seen the Toy Story 4 movie, basically, he's He is Evel Knievel type writer who's makes jumps, and he's adequate at making the jumps. He tends to crash when he gets to the end, which is why we have the kaboom. But he's basically he does what he needs to do to get things done. And I think this is what, when we talk about adequate, we think about. Adequate is not perfect. Adequate is getting things done in a way that's meaningful for the particular party in question. So for researchers, this to me means can a measure help produce meaningful results that help us in understanding phenomena? For practitioners, is a measure able to inform corporate actions and help them in performing corporate strategies and making other decisions that are needed as a company? And again, from here, I'll take the position that the reputation measures we have are adequate to accomplish this. I will note, different reputation measures are based on different audience perceptions, which implies differing purposes, which gets down the future to one of the problems with the literature. But when we think of something like the Fortune's world's most admired companies, this is based on expert evaluations looking at a firm. So there are people, business analysts, people with close connections to the firm, and so they have one opinion. The RepTrak measure based or developed by the now RepTrak company, formerly the Reputation Institute. This is based on public evaluation. So they survey members of the public in terms of what they believe corporate reputation or the reputation of a firm is. And so this is based on a completely different audience, and obviously because it's the reputation as evaluated by a different audience, it's probably going to have a different measurement than the one based on the experts of companies. And again, using these different measures may produce different types of evaluations and different outcomes and analyses. So while not perfect, I would say reputation measures have been found to have statistical properties conducive to academic research. And there's a number of studies who have looked at different reputation measures and found this. And I list a few here. So Naomi Gardberg, who's going to talk later in this panel, she looked at cross-cultural construct and instrument equivalence in measurements. Ponzi, Fombrun, and Gardberg looked at the measurement validation in the Reputations Institute's RepTrak measure. Fombrun, Ponzi, and Newburry looked at 7 dimensions of corporate reputation and how they related to the overall construct. And then Sarstedt, Wilczynski, and Melawar, they did a comparison of the convergent and criterion validities across several measures. And all these studies and many more like them, and looked at the actual measurement of the construct of reputation, and in one way or another each study has found that measurement has produced certain qualities that are needed to have scientific rigor when used in management research papers and academic research papers, and shown there is some underlying validity to the reputation construct. Now, maybe not perfect, because I know there are issues even with these different measures, but at least there's something that can be used and has been shown to be used. And to that point, I did just a quick search on Procrest. I think it was yesterday, and just looking at the terms corporate reputation and firm reputation. So I found slightly under 1,700 peer-reviewed academic articles and almost 8,000 peer-reviewed articles for 1,700 with reputation in the title, 8,000 with reputation in the abstract. And this was the narrow search frame of just corporate and firm reputation, not organizational reputation, not multinational reputation, not just reputation itself. So really, the number of studies that have passed the peer-reviewed journal process with the term reputation in them is huge. And I think this shows that the reputation construct has been judged by academic reviewers and academic journals to have some validity. And so I think this is an important indicator. I also know promote for Mike and Tim Pollack's book, Handbook on Corporate Reputation, they put together a few years ago. There are tons of books and other pieces out there that also analyze the corporate reputation construct, and this gives a lot of validity to the construct. From the practitioner side, I'd make the argument that reputation is one of the things that we study as academics that actually gets a lot of attention by practitioners, and it's something that that practitioners use a lot. Both overall reputation and reputation with respect to different dimensions. So I think everywhere you look now, you can see things about the top 100 innovative companies, or the best places to work, or the best CSR companies, or best corporate governance of companies, in addition to just general overall reputation of companies. Companies use these things. They work hard to achieve these recognitions. They advertise based on these recognitions, and many of them are directly based on measures that we also use in our academic studies. And so I think this shows that there's some kind of real world applicability to what academics are doing, in the same way it shows that academics are building on the real world, or the practitioner world, in the reputation space. And I think this is something that's very important and very supportive of this being a good construct. And I will say also the reputation measures have captured the dimensions that practitioners highlight. So here we look at the 7 drivers of reputation in the RepTrak measurement system, things like leadership, performance, products and service quality, innovation, workplace governance, citizenship. These are the same things that the practitioners are highlighting in their advertising, and I think this demonstrates the adequacy of the construct in terms of bridging that practitioner academic divide. So with that, I'm going to say we have reputation is adequately measured based on what we've done so far. Now, does this mean everything's perfect? Obviously not. And so I would like to talk just real briefly in the last couple of minutes of my presentation of what we should be paying more attention to. And I think what we should be paying more attention to is the embeddedness of corporate reputation assessments in higher level context. And so, so much reputation literature is based on measures from a single country or from a single region. I think part of this is driven by the long-term availability of the Fortune's most admired companies index. Now that for a long time was just U.S. companies and still is predominantly U.S. companies. And this has meant that context has been controlled in a lot of the studies and not considered when developed academic theory. But some recent studies have shown that reputation, context matters. So Deephouse et al. 2016, for example, looked at how societal culture and societal development levels actually made a difference to reputation assessment. So the more developed the society was, actually the more stringent people were in assessing companies in that society. Similarly, Borda et al. 2017 in the journal World Business, in their post hoc analysis, they broke their reputation dimension into a popular assessment and an expert reputation assessment, similar to the difference between Fortune's most admired companies and the RepTrak measure, although using a third different measure. And they actually found out that when you break the reputation dimension into 2 pieces, some of the factors are the same, but all of the factors weren't. And actually, the one factor actually switched directions of prediction when you switch to the different outcome measure. And so I think context matters in here. Looking specifically at Canada, and this is in deference to our moderator David Deephouse from Canada. We know that the RepTrak country RepTrak is rated. Canada has very high in almost every year that the survey has been done, and so Canada is in one measure a highly reputed country and certainly deserving of that reputation. And so, but on the other side, we could think of other situations, and I'll just pick the South Park movie here, where in certain contexts and certain groups, this takes it to an extreme, but maybe in certain contexts, Canada doesn't have a great reputation, and so the idea is, how do we manage how a country or a company, in our case's reputation, may vary based on the context when it's measured. And so I'll conclude by just saying, Mike asked, what research questions should we be asking? And I said, I think the question we should ask is, how can we better match particular reputation measures with academic theory that takes into account the context where reputation is being assessed? And I emphasize I emphasize country, but it also Mike and Andy Hoffman many years ago did a special issue of Corporate Reputation Review focused on industry difference in reputation assessment. There are also differences based on stakeholder expectations of firms. So the stakeholder context also measures impacts how reputation might be influenced. And I think there are many other contextual factors besides these three that are important to consider in our theory as we move it forward. So with that, I'd just like to say thank you for including me in this panel. I look forward to hearing from my esteemed co-panelists coming up right now. And again, thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Bill. We will now turn it over to King Kong Bundy. Bill, if you could unshare, I guess. And then...
I think I've stopped, so.
Mike, for years, my dad had convinced me and my brothers that we were related to King Kong Bundy. I don't know if anyone in the audience was to Google a picture of him. There's not a whole lot of resemblance there. I at least 20 years, I thought he was a cousin of mine. And then I actually looked it up, and it turns out we're not related at all. It was just a long-term joke that my dad was playing on us, and that we were too dumb to realize.
Your whole life is a lie, John.
Yeah, I know. It took some soul searching when all that was over.
Ted Bundy?
Huh?
Ted Bundy is out as well, or
Ted Bundy? Uncle Ted is not a relative either. Al Bundy is the only one that's a true relative.
We're going to keep Cliven. I'm going to associate with Cliven Bundy no matter what. So
yeah, well, Cliven, there is some resemblance. That one might be real. Hey, welcome, Bill. Thanks for the great presentation, and Mike, thanks for inviting me to be on the panel with Naomi and David as well. Really great. I've been attending almost all of these seminars, and they've been really great. They've cost me a little bit of money, Mike, because I don't know if you can see on my side here, I've got stacks of books, because at every one of these people mention and bring up really good books that they've read, and so I go buy them and then just stack them over here. And I can see David Deephouse is teasing us with a bunch as well. I would highly recommend in this space the Oxford Handbook. Rupert has a great practitioner book on reputation as well, and there's a bunch of other good ones, Charles von Brum's classics as well. So really happy to be here, really happy to take part in this seminar, just noting my time so I don't go too far over. So my job here is to say, no, we can't adequately assess corporate reputation. So there's my, that's a no. And I'm going to go through three primary reasons why I think it becomes really difficult, even to meet what Bill highlighted, is that kind of low-hanging bar of what is adequate. Even to meet that bar, I think, is pretty difficult in this space. And so I'll highlight those reasons and get into some details, and then conclude, as Mike asked us to, with maybe some new research questions that we can ask ourselves. But before we get into that, I wanted to do a thought experiment with the group here. And some of you maybe have gone through this before, those of you who regularly attend the Oxford conference. I'd like everybody to close your eyes, and not just those of you with your cameras on that are looking at me. I want everyone who's got their camera off and is maybe sending emails or doing other things to also close your eyes. So, hey, stop sending emails, whoever you are, and close your eyes. If you're driving, I'll give you an exception. That's perfectly fine. You can keep them open. Maybe just close one of them. With your eyes closed, I want you to think about what all the things that you might be known for. Reputation captures kind of how we are perceived and interpreted by others, by those around us. And so think about all the things that you might be known for. Maybe you're known for being a great mother, father, brother, sister, or cousin, or second cousin, or whatever it might be. So maybe you're known in your family for being generous or kind, or whatever it might be. Maybe you're known in the workplace for your teaching or your research or your service or your collegiality or your mean, and they know never to knock on your door. You might be known for those kinds of things in the professional setting. Maybe you're known for things outside of both of those. Maybe you're known for being a wonderful knitter, or you're a star on YouTube or Instagram, or you're known for making a delicious apple pie, or whatever it might be, right? All the things in your life that you are known for that might capture your reputation, right? And so when I think about this, when I close my eyes and I do this exercise, I don't know about you, but when I go through this and I think about how might I capture all that, how might I measure all these things that I'm known for, and what might that number be? Because any measure has to have some numerical rating so we can throw it into those statistics software, right? I don't know about you, but for me, and you can open your eyes now for the grand reveal, that measure is 6. All the things I'm known for adequately captured in the number 6. I felt like going with 7 or 8 was a little pretentious. I didn't want to kind of say I'm there. I felt like going like 2 or 3. Why would you listen to someone who's a 2 or 3 on the reputation? So 6 felt right when I kind of thought about my reputation and how it might be captured and measured for analysis. And so I think we all, whatever your number might be, there's probably a lot of 8s and 9s in the room. Mike, maybe a couple 1s and 2s. I don't know how far this listserv goes. I think we can all kind of recognize that capturing all those things that were maybe going on in your mind is a pretty difficult task. And, a simple number like 6, uncontextualized, as Bill was highlighted, doesn't really quite capture what we need it to. And so that exercise kind of inherently, I think, in a way, captures all 3 of the problems that I think prevent us from adequately measuring corporate reputation. So I'll go those in a little bit of detail, highlighting some of my work and highlighting some work of others that kind of prevent us, that kind of get in the way of us really getting at this construct in a way that we can kind of visualize and think about in our minds. Trying to get that onto paper, trying to get that into a spreadsheet becomes a relatively tricky task. The first problem, anytime you're going to measure something, you have to have a nice solid definition of the construct. And in my experience, when I think about the reputation literature, both the academic side and even the practitioner side, I don't think we have a common definition of reputation yet. My friend Sasha Rathel in Berlin identified 30 different definitions of reputation in the management literature alone, and that was just looking at like the top 6 journals. He identified another 15 in accounting, and God knows how many more maybe in other research spaces. So we've got a lot of different definitions floating out there that capture this concept of reputation. Just to highlight kind of a few of the popular ones, right? The one I like to go to quite a bit is often the Rendova et al. 2005 one that essentially captures or describes reputation as this ability to create value. And so maybe the things that you were thinking about in your mind reflect the value that you create in the various spaces that you are engaged in. But value isn't kind of the only way that we've conceptualized or thought of reputation. Another very famous citation from him, Shanley, kind of talk about reputation as a signal of key characteristics. So notice the pluralness there, right? Getting beyond value and thinking about characteristics more plurally, and maybe getting beyond value. So multiple different things that we might be known for, that might be captured in the idea of reputation. From in his book, defined it even a little differently, perceptual reputation that describes the overall appeal of the firm. And so rather than focusing on specific things like value or characteristics, we're now kind of getting to something a little different, which is appeal, how much we like the firm. In a lot of the popular definitions, the dictionary definitions of reputation, we see something similar, right? Here's the Webster Dictionary, the fact of being highly esteemed. And when I think about the word appeal and when I think about the word esteem, even those two words seem different in my mind, but all of those do still seem to capture what I was thinking about when I had my eyes closed and I was thinking about the reputation of myself. And then finally, our esteemed host here, Mike Barnett, also has a definition of reputation based on the assessment of the impacts attributed to the corporation. So that kind of captures the idea of value or the characteristics, but rather than looking at kind of characteristics that the organization or the individual has, it's more about what they do. So the impacts that they have on the world. So all of these things capture elements in our brain that we can identify as reputation, but they're all slightly different and they're slightly unique. And so what we have is a very confusing mess of a situation. I teach a doctoral seminar on social evaluations, and we do a different evaluation each week, and reputation is our first week. And we spend the first hour and a half of the class trying to define the construct. And I get on the whiteboard and I write down all the different definitions and we try to do arrows and try to figure it all out. And universally, every time I've taught this class, we take our coffee break and everyone is like this like deflated and sad look on their face because we walk away and we're like, I don't think I know what reputation is after this conversation. And I've been studying this stuff for a long time. So we have a confusing kind of construct space in terms of the definition that extends beyond just the definition. But when we think about kind of the theoretical dimensionality of reputation or some of the kind of mechanisms underneath reputation, we've also got a pretty confusing space. Lots of really wonderful research, by the way. I love all those definitions on the previous slide, and I love all the papers that I'm going to show you here, but it highlights that we don't quite have a clear idea of what's going on here. When we think about the dimensionality of reputation, Don Lang, what I call the Langian view, he, in his review in 2013 with colleagues, gave us 3 dimensions of reputation: being known for something, and this idea of generalized favorability, right? In the same year, Alex Betektine gave us a flow chart of maybe where reputation judgments come from. He paired those with status and legitimacy and things like that. So kind of how we cognitively think about reputation, not necessarily capturing all those dimensions from the Langian view, but at least a few of them. More recently, Tim Pollock and colleagues have given us kind of the socio-cognitive content in an annals piece to think about reputation in terms of its rational and emotional and moral elements. Michael Etter and his colleagues have given us a wonderful view of how reputation might be different or new or unique in the social media era. So as we kind of move into this new space of life, we might get new dimensionality or new mechanisms associated with reputation. And Davide Ravasi and colleagues in another annals piece talked about the multi-level dynamics of reputation, how reputation might exist at individuals and at organizational and societal levels. So we've got a lot of confusion still, and we're trying to figure this all out. And again, wonderful research, all of these papers. I love them to death. But when I think about it, when I try to make sense of it all in my brain, this is kind of what I get, right? And this is certainly what my students get. I think we leave the class and we're like, I have no idea what's going on anymore. I'm just going to give up. And so to kind of summarize this idea of definitional problems, I often think of the Potter-Stewart quote. And Michael, remind me, I think this is not the first time the Potter-Stewart quote has come up in the QUASI seminar series. This is a Supreme Court justice. He was making a decision in reference to obscenity laws as they applied to a motion picture in the 1970s. Or I'm sorry, it was 60s or 50s even. Here's the full quote. Under the First and 14th Amendments, criminal laws in this area are constitutionally limited to hardcore pornography. I shall not today attempt to further define the kinds of material I understand to be embraced within the shorthand description of hardcore pornography. And perhaps I could never succeed in intelligibly doing so, but I know it when I see it. And that's the big quote. And the motion picture involved in this case is not that. So he knows obscenity when he sees it, and that's how we kind of judge what it is. I'm gonna leverage that quote and say we know reputation when we see it. We all kind of have an intuitive understanding of what reputation is. You all went through it in the thought exercise at the beginning here. The problem is when we try to put that on paper and define it, they don't always line up. They don't always agree with each other. And that makes it a problem from a measurement perspective. How do we adequately measure something that we don't kind of all agree on the conceptual space here? We'll come back to Potter Stewart in just a minute as we get into some of these other problems. So that's problem number one, no common definition. Problem number two is reputation is multifaceted. We have a lot of different reputations, and I asked you to think about the different ones that you might have in your life. When I think about this idea of reputation for what, I'll give a shout out to the Oxford University Center for Corporate Reputation and Rupert Younger, who I saw in the crowd. They've done a very good job in terms of helping us understand this idea of multiple reputations, or reputation for what. On their website, they have this statement: organizations do not have a single reputation, they have a reputation for something with someone, which can mean several different, even competing reputation. And then a nice solid statement: there is no single measure of reputation. Again, I think we all intuitively understand this idea that there are multiple reputations that exist out there. And because there's multiple reputations, it makes it hard to aggregate into one measure, the measure 6 that I kind of measure as myself. So let's think about that, how that might apply to the most famous one single measure of reputation, which is the Fortune's Most Admired ranking. If you look at the methodology, and I know there's always a little bit of confusion, right? As Bill said, they asked directors, executives, and analysts to rate their industry on 9 different criteria. And those might be investment value, quality of management, products and services, or social responsibility. So and then they take those 9 different criteria ratings and aggregate them up for an overall ranking. And we know that, Apple or Google or Amazon or whoever is often number 1 in that particular rating. So let's take 2 hypothetical firms in that particular rating. Firm A, across some of these criteria, might look like this. Maybe criteria 1 is CSR, criteria 2 is performance, criteria 3 is a nice place to work or management or whatever, right? So it might look something like this. Firm B might have the exact opposite profile on those different Fortune Most Admired criteria. Well, when Fortune does its magic and aggregates these things up for the overall ranking, they would be equal. They would be next to each other. These would be ranked, number 6 on the Fortune's Most Admired ranking. But I think when we think about these criteria, and if we compare these criteria, we know that these firms are probably not equal to each other. They have very different reputations, but when we try to measure them using one single measure, we give them the same score. So that's another problem associated with the adequacy of measuring corporate reputation.
You hit your time limit, Bundy. So
okay, I'm almost done. I'm gonna talk faster now, Mike. This might suggest that we have infinite possibilities, which is kind of nice to think about. You might have this motivational poster on your wall, but from a measurement perspective, it creates a lot of problems. You have to make a lot of choices in which direction to go. You have to categorize and capture those choices, and so it kind of leads to a mess. To speed up just a little bit, problem 3, reputation is also according to someone, the classic perceptual problem, right? What your view of a firm or an individual's reputation might be very different than my view of that reputation. Back to Potter Stewart, I shall not, I know pornography when I see it. Well, a lot of criticism of this kind of community standard approach to defining obscenity is, well, I know it when I see it, and someone else will know it when they see it, but what they see and what I know, or what they know and what I see, may be different. And that's okay, right? So we all have a different perception of what is obscene. Mike's definition of what is hardcore pornography is probably very different than my definition of what that is. And so that kind of influences the way we might think about these things, including reputation. By the way, Potter Stewart in his later years wrote a lot of detail on why he regretted that standard. He recognized all the problems that I know it when I see it creates in terms of trying to identify obscenity, and I think the same is true for reputation. Let me end with a discussion of some of my own research. This is a project I did with Mike Baer. It's published in Personnel Psychology in 2018. We were looking at how reputation influences employees, and in particular, kind of how it influences them in good and bad ways. Here's the big model, but you don't need to pay attention to all of it. Pay attention to the left side there. We looked at the relationship between organizational reputation as a big collective level representation and how that influences employees' perceptions of reputation, my view of the firm's reputation. We measured on the left that big collective level using subject matter expert ratings. So we asked people to rate these firms who were business professionals, but we did it in other ways too. We did a general survey of the general public, and we also looked at the Fortune Most Admired rankings, and they all went around the same way. It only explains about 20% of the variance in the individual's perceptions of reputation. That means about 80% of our understanding of a firm from the idea of reputation is based on our own experiences with that firm, based on our own knowledge with that firm. This was employee perception, so I'm guessing that's higher than if it was just the general public or whatever. But it's key to understand that when you think about the outcomes associated with reputation, notice that none of those outcomes are significantly related to that big reputation, the reputation that exists in Fortune Most Admired. All of the outcomes flow from the individual's perception. So how do we adequately assess all the variance across all the individuals as they judge the firm, right? So to end, a better question might be, can we adequately assess reputation? As Bill kind of highlighted, I think we need to contextualize quite a bit. How can we adequately assess reputation that matter for critical outcomes of interest within a given context according to a specified time period and specifically identified stakeholder? That's a mouthful, right? But the idea that reputation is a highly contextualized construct, or to highlight some of my bias, and maybe I had to argue against my own personal beliefs, right? Maybe when I know it, when I see it, is that good enough, right? To get at some of the outcomes that we're interested in. Sorry for going over. That's it from me.
All right, thank you, sir. And now we go over to Naomi, who's going to dig even further into those many, many contingencies that affect reputation.
Well, it is great to follow Bill and Jonathan and talking about corporate reputations and whether we can adequately assess them. So I hope to build on their comments as we explore this really, I think, fundamental question. So, Jonathan asked us, that whether we have an idea in our head of what our reputation would be. And I'm not sure if we do. I mean, are we talking about what is our image or our identity or our reputation or our status? And so we have this really rich nomological network of corporate associations and social perceptions and social judgments, very rich. And, one of our problems with coming up with a definition for corporate reputation is, can we distinguish corporate reputation from these other constructs? And I ask this because sometimes people acknowledge that they are using one of these as a proxy for another one. So we're going to use image as a proxy for reputation or something like that. And I say, if each construct has discriminate validity, then each construct has its own antecedents and consequences. And then we're just muddling our research because we're saying that one of these other social evaluations is reputation when we're really just measuring what that construct is, right? Plus, we have several corporate reputation measurement instruments that we can employ. And this is true whether you are the one collecting the data yourself or relying on archival data. And I'll talk a little bit about different ones. Right, but I'm not, as we discuss all these different definitions of corporate reputation, I really do think that we need to think about that definition and wonder, is it really corporate reputation they're talking about, or is it image, right? Or is it status? And I think we need to think carefully about it. And is that definition specific enough to capture corporate reputation, or is it actually capturing a family of related constructs? So I'm giving a big red X. So just very quickly, one of the things that we need to think about is how these different measurements are created, right? And I'm not going to give a research methods lecture here. We have formative measures where we have different items that are supposed to be highly correlated. Not correlated, that create an index of some kind, such as the consumer product index. And then we have reflective measures where the items are supposed to be highly correlated and reflect the construct in question. So we can measure corporate reputation using different types of instruments. And so I'll start off with a reflective measure that works, right? If we think about corporate reputation as a company that we trust and that is appealing and that we admire, then we can create a reflective measure with 3 items that are highly correlated. They have excellent properties when we look at Cronbach's alpha, and they load over 90% on corporate reputation. And this is true across stakeholder groups, across countries, across time, right? It's very, very stable. And it's easy to launch if, in fact, you are measuring a company's reputation and want to compare different companies, and it translates very easily into different languages. Oh, that's what I just said. Now, formative measures, and we have 2, which Bill talked a bit about, the rep track, and then the RQ, which was the one that I created with Charles when I was a doctoral student, right? These are formative measures where we went out, we tried to, capture the domain of what is reputation and came up with lots of items that we could then break into dimensions to capture some of the things that Jonathan was talking about. And you'll notice that RQ was the first one, and then the rep track was created because we learned a lot more about measurement. And the emotional appeal was pulled out. It became actually its separate item. So that's the feeling good about, the admiring, respecting, and the trusting that I talked about before, right? And so, yes, this data, the archival data is available. And in fact, the items are publicly available if you want to measure these yourself. So I just want to talk a little bit about the 3 measures, right? So we have the world's most admired companies. We've heard about that from our other panelists. I just want you to look at the list, right? This is the, I think this is the 2021 list that I put. Should double confirm that. David Deephouse, is there anything strange about the world's most admired company list?
How do people in outside the United States know anything about Costco wholesale? Have they expanded to India, China? In fact, gosh, look at those country lists. Is there a Fortune China? China is a country of good fortune. Would they have all American companies in their list?
Right. So in fact, Bill, do you want to guess where the highest ranked non-US company is on this list? Just guess.
I don't know, but it's way down there, maybe 50.
Okay, it is better than that. It's Unilever at number 30. Okay, so I just want to suggest that we need to look at the sampling frames before we adopt archival data into our research, because to me, this does not have face validity. And David, just to let you know, Costco has expanded to other countries, but still, I think 80% of its revenue is from the United States. Okay, so then we have the corporate reputation quotient, formerly known as the RQ. The folks at Harris have merged several times into different organizations. So now it's the Axios, part of the Axios Harris Poll 100, but this is the original RQ. They only report US data on their website, but the scale has been validated in many countries, and private companies hire Harris to collect the data. And I don't know, but if I look at 2020 and I see Clorox is #1, that gives me some confidence, at least in the face validity for the 2020 rankings. I have confidence in the folks at the Harris poll and their polling techniques and how they weight the data. They do propensity weighting to make sure that the members of the online panel can be weighted to the general public, since not everyone participates in online panels. And so if we look at all the different people measuring reputation, I am confident that the folks at Harris have the best polling technology and are the most valid in terms of capturing the general public's view of a company, okay, without a doubt. And this is publicly available data. There are some odd things that we can talk about at another time, such as, you know, whether those formative items would still hold up now and across different countries. Because what you don't realize, but I know this, is that some items have very high not sures, such as the workplace environment. They have very high not sures. Most of the public has no idea how companies treat their employees. And they often just substitute like kind of a halo effect of what they know about a company, good or bad, for the things they're not sure about, right? And then we have the rep track, which Bill has already talked about. Now, this again has a different sampling frame. This is the general public and different countries. I think, is it 25 different countries? And I'm going to talk about the sampling frame in just a minute. And if I look at this and I'm like, wow, Lego number one, okay, that makes sense. And Rolex and Ferrari and Bosch and Harley Davidson. But we can see that, in fact, our number 5 Harley Davidson is a US company. And then we go down to Walt Disney at number 8 and Microsoft at number 10. And so if we're just looking at the numbers, this does seem to have more face validity in terms of whether it's really measuring corporate reputation of an international audience. Right. So my concern about the formative measures is that in capturing that domain of items, we've already seen that the domain did shift from the original RQ development into the rep track. For example, transparency did not come up at all in the focus groups when we were creating the first measure. It only came up, I want to say, in the Netherlands, and it was the only country where transparency was important. But over time, transparency has become more important. So my question mark about these formative measures is whether or not those items are stable over time, and whether or not, and I know for a fact that not all items are important in every country, or that people are as familiar or know the information about them. So I would say that it is less consistent across stakeholders and less constant over institutional environments. And I think Bill's work does look at that. And so I think this is one thing to be careful about as we measure or try to measure corporate reputation using a formative index. And then I just have to say this, corporate reputation is not equal to visibility. I know that people talk about this. It is an artifact of the data collection process, right? And so I have from the Axios Harris poll, the first step is top of mind awareness. So if you're looking at the list and you see Coca-Cola on the list and you don't see Pepsi, it's not that maybe Pepsi has a worse reputation than Coca-Cola, but when the public was polled, they said name 3 companies with the best reputation and 3 companies with the worst reputation. Pepsi didn't make the top 3 or the worst 3, right? And so we have a strong bias on the sampling frame that is being used for the company samples. And we really need to know that if we're trying to use archival data. But of course, you collecting your own data can design your own sampling frame. Then I have to talk about reputation for, right? And my thing is that when we're measuring reputation for, it needs to meet the same norms and expectations of construct measurement, whether we're thinking about Churchill's reflective measures, or we're creating a formative measure. We really need to think about what is the domain of a reputation for quality? What is the domain for a reputation for innovativeness? I can assure you it's not one item from Consumer Reports, right? And so just to give you an example, the paper I have on reputation for CSR, we actually use the citizenship dimension of the rep track, which is 3 or 4 items. So we really were trying to capture the domain of what a reputation for CSR would be, right? So this, I just, is a question mark. I think we can talk about reputation for things, but when I review papers, most people are not thinking about what it really means to have a reputation for quality. Okay, so what? We have reflective measure that is valid and reliable across time and sample. I know it's very simple to ask people whether or not they trust a company, whether they admire the company, whether they have a good feeling about the company, but it is extremely highly correlated with an overall measure of reputation, a one item measure. And when we create a formative measure, we can usually get within, 80%, somewhere around there. So it's a formative. I'm concerned that the importance and relevance of items varies over time and sample, and these not sure rates are something to really look at. So maybe. Our reputation for concept, we really need to challenge authors to actually measure the construct reputation for something. And then this danger of using very poor proxies because even if we use Tobin's Q, let's say, as a measure of reputation, I mean, Tobin's Q is used as a measure of a lot of different constructs. Just look in, S and J. And for you, right, archival data, you have to look at the 2 levels of sampling, the company sample and the respondent sampling, to be able to decide how to use that data and when it's appropriate to use it. Because the companies that are missing from these lists can be missing for lots of different reasons. And some of the lists only have the top companies and don't have like the full variation of good and bad reputations too. So that's a question mark. So can we adequately assess corporate reputation? Maybe. And so I want to ask, can we develop norms around the measurement of this network of socially constructed constructs? And I'm hoping that we can. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Naomi. Hopefully we'll get some time to sort out what those norms would look like, what kind of things you're looking for there. But let's turn it over to David to kind of bring it all together, and then we'll head over to the Q&A after that.
Let me unmute. Let's see, practice my screen sharing activities. I should be practiced on this, but I'm not. So share screen. There it is. Hold it. There it isn't. Once again, a year of Zoom teaching, I'm still just not with it. That's why I'm doing it again next year for a variety of reasons. Well, I had to stand up. There's really no room and no time for moderation in this panel. Mike told me to, if I can't find anything to moderate, I'll have to do something. And, I just really couldn't find really anything to moderate. But first, let me acknowledge that my university, the University of Alberta, sits on Treaty 6 territory in the northern plains of above the colonial boundary in Turtle Island. And it's also located in the Zone 4 of the Métis Nation of Alberta. I personally acknowledge that I am currently a guest on the traditional territory of the Quotient people in the Cascadia bioregion, somewhat near Vancouver, where we would have all been together last year. But because of coronavirus, here I am marooned on a not so deserted island, not with 7 people associated with the Gilligan and Skipper. Moving forward, so here are the sort of final questions. The will of Bill, the hilarity and profundity of John Bundy, and the guarded optimism of Naomi Gardberg. And I just can't find a lot of room to moderate in here. They're all just so close. Well, Bill mentions theory. Sean talks about specifically identified stakeholders. Naomi talks about a whole network of constructs, and yes, those spinning social evaluation constructs, yeah, they're important. Yeah, I don't know what to moderate. Anybody else might want to find things to moderate, you can put them into the chat. Yeah, John, you talked about multiple definitions. Yeah, I've got multiple definitions in my own work. Back in the crowded house of Deephouse, back in Louisiana, we had stakeholders with different reputations. Investors and customers loved Walmart, and they loved them for different reasons, for low prices. However, suppliers hated Walmart because Walmart was a bully and they're always pushing them around. And then, well, Deephouse next year publishes a paper saying, gosh, this is the overall reputation measure. And, it actually increases performance. Could it be as much as 10% in a competitive industry like Twin Cities Commercial Bank? So yeah, multiple definitions, John, I got them in my own work. And it was good to see these multiple definitions come together and be elegantly developed by Don, Peggy, and Ya in that 2011 piece that was developed that John already mentioned. Thanks, John, for bringing that slide to me. So what Naomi showed me that the two-step process using this model, we got visibility being known to enough people. And that's, the whole idea of visibility, and, it's kind of step one, and it's just one part of this dimensional thing. But is it actually really legitimate? Because, there's a lot of talk about legitimacy as being visibility. And we look at like Pollock and Rendova 2003 media legitimation, where the volume of new information media coverage is important. And then step two is the evaluation of the what's and the what's. These criteria, you could look at the profundity, Bundy piece with Deephouse, Toast, and Suchman in 2017 for more about the who's and what's of criteria. And of course, got to remember, I guess, smaller corporations don't have reputations. In fact, don't have corporate reputations because they're too small to have reputations. More application to the hilarity and profundity of Mr. Bundy. We think about critical outcomes of interest, give us a linkage to what, a specific time period associated with when, and specifically identified stakeholders as being who. So when we think about adequately assessing the being known for what, when, and for whom, and subsuming ourselves into the space-time continuum, we find ourselves playing in reputation research, the who, what, or where game with Art James. And another trivia question, this sort of leads me to think about who decides, and Bill recently mentioned Borda et al. About the differences in popular and expert reputation assessments. You might think about looking back at this now old 20 years ago piece, Weinberg and Gemser piece about the selection system, about market selection, peer selection, expert selection, and maybe there are ways we can improve this, sort of expand upon this model or apply in our reputational work. Now that we're on I brought up the subject of game shows. What was the only game show to feature a great social theorist? You can put that in the chat. Rupert Younger, I'm sure, might know the answer, and probably a few other people. Yes, it was World Forum in December of 1970 with Lenin, Mao Zedong, Che Guevara, and Karl Marx. And here's Karl Marx answering the question, the workers control the means of production, as a sort of the answer to Eric Idle's question. So moving from great social theory to great management theory and its components, we think about the who, what, or where, plus the when, why, and how. So I'd like you to consider these choices for your next study, and maybe it's going to be about reputation. Will it be a gap-filling study of large US corporations using a commercially available database produced by a commercial operation which is trying to sell newspapers or consulting services? Or maybe you want to use a scholarly source like Peggy Lee, Yajin, and Tim Pollock's piece on VC Reputation Index, graciously expanded by the Oxford Center for Reputation. Kathy Rabine just a few minutes ago in chat suggests maybe develop your own measure. But then, of course, you have to run the whole gamut of proving that your measure is worthwhile. And maybe you can do okay with that if you're asking a big enough research problem or a big enough research question. So like the study of employee behavior. And I think, unlike John's perception where organizational reputation measured by these externals, the perception of the reputation based on own experience, because we know reputation is based on, especially on experience, and then also by network relationships before we go out and look at these general media things and the notion of obtrusiveness that we learned from communication theory. You might also look at other things having to do with grand challenges, sustainable development goals, or perhaps local community-driven challenges. And for answers, you've got to return to the who, to these activities, and got to then ask, who are you when you decide what, why, how you do this research? Who are you engaged with as a scholar, as a person, as a co-author? What's important to your research identity? How do you like to work? Who do you relate to? Who do you do this work for? These are important questions when you're doing reputation research or any study that would help you better assess reputation. For some instances, you may think about who you work for. I saw Sandra Waddick in the audience, and she reminded us that in 2011 article, and she might still remind us today if we ask her, we are all stakeholders of Gaia. And the First Nations people all pretty much acknowledge that we are all related, including I am related to my daughter. So I'm doing this work for my daughter and for all my relations. To conclude, assessing reputation is not the same as measuring reputation for large corporations of large samples of individuals. Whatever happened to reputation in the humanities? Should we care about it? I don't give a damn about my bad reputation, saying Joan Jett, echoed by Charles Fomburn at some reputation conference 10 years ago now. And this debate that we're having now is actually a normal debate when we do social research, as reflected by Kaplan, Stinchcomb, E.O. Wright there. So thank you everyone for your attendance, and to cite Scott Graffin from the first Pachakacha about social evaluations, you've been the world's best audience.
All right, David, thank you. So, after all that, I'm a little bit worried that we're suffering the same misfortune as having sat through, a Bundy seminar, right? And nobody wants to do that, but at the end of it, we're more confused maybe than we came in. So I ask you to put your hand up in the chat function if you have a question, but I'm just going to start us off, I think, with a broad one, which Sandra Waddick brought up, which is that, why does reputation even matter? Why do we want to measure it? And how does what does getting a better measure of it even get us? So if we can just kind of go back to that basic before we kind of pick on specific measures of it. Anybody want to go first? Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
So, I mean, more generally, I would say, there has been quite a number of studies out there that, since we're talking about corporate reputation as the focus here, there are quite a number of studies that shown that corporate reputation leads to more people wanting to buy your products, more people wanting to invest in your company, people wanting to work for you, and a whole range of stakeholder behaviors that are supportive of a firm. And so, now obviously some of these studies are flawed in terms of the measures and how they were done, but the idea is that, and companies believe this, or else companies wouldn't have grasped onto this reputation construct so firmly that I want people to buy my company's products. I want people to want to work for me. And so, I work at FIU. We were named one of those best places to work. And so they have signs all over the place, and they make, they want.
But you're going two different directions, right? Is it, in whose interest is this? Is it, the firms are trying to project this in order to put on a better face, or is it, this is a tool to help stakeholders better understand which organizations they should be transacting with?
Yeah, and I think it works both. I think it's, I think it's useful for individuals to know, which individuals don't have the ability to know everything themselves, but if they they need kind of shorthand, and so reputation serves as that shorthand in terms of making decisions when they can't know everything themselves, particularly for products things you just can't know.
It's a heuristic for the
for
goodness,
heuristic, yeah.
some quality of a product. Okay, Naomi.
So many of our theories in management and really in social science are about understanding and managing uncertainty, right? And so reputation's whole point is to predict the future behavior of some entity, right? And that's why it's so important, at least in my view, to get at those kind of reputation for who, for what, because if I'm making a prediction, it's entirely based on what I want to get out of the relationship and what I expect from it. And so it's very contextualized when we think about its ultimate value, whereas maybe a fortune most admired doesn't tell us a lot about the future behavior of Apple, other than that they'll continue to be big and global and whatever, right? And so
Well, that's
I
what
think
I'm getting at.
uncertainty underlies reputation for sure.
So a good measure is one that accurately predicts future behavior. Is that?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
And there's been studies, and they're kind of crappy at that, right? I mean, is that what we're trying to do? We're trying to get a better measure of the future behavior of companies on whatever dimension.
Yeah, I think that's one way to assess whether a measure works or not, right?
Because, I mean, a lot of it too is, do you want to transact at that moment in time with the firm? And that's another thing I'm getting at here is that, experience trumps any of this other stuff, doesn't it? I mean, do you need measures if you have direct interaction? Walmart sucks if you go into a Walmart, right? You don't need Fortune to tell you whether or not Walmart sucks. And everybody has experience with Walmart, so does it even matter that we have that score?
Actually, not all of my Baruch students have experience at Walmart.
So do they need to know about Walmart if they have no experience? I mean, the whole point of the reputation too is so that experience is encouraged, I guess.
Yeah, but they may need, oh, sorry, go ahead, Naomi.
No, I mean, I think, one of the things about corporate reputation as a construct is that it is an everyday parlance. And I think that is that intuitive element is people want to know about the reputation for predicting, their future transactions, whether it's someplace where they would want to work or whether it's someplace that they would want to shop. And that's where the idea of the specific kind. Yes, Walmart's known for not treating its employees very well. They have a lot of employees on food stamps and who don't have health insurance. But at the same time, I know that I can buy really inexpensive products there. Right. So that's that reputation for different elements.
Yeah, but you know that without reading the Fortune list. But.
Well, I'm from Alabama. I've been to Walmart, right?
So
I don't need a Fortune list to tell me that.
Yeah. All right. I'm not seeing any hands going up, but I'd like for you guys to either, you guys can have additional questions or feedback, and if nothing else, we'll go to the norms discussion with Naomi.
Okay, I just want to go back to the Walmart one, right? So I just quickly looked at, we were just talking about Fortune, right? They were number 11 on, the Fortune's list, right? Walmart lost a huge amount of money in Germany and totally pulled out. They pulled out of South Korea. They are pulling out of Brazil. So, I mean, most people would not know that about Walmart and its many international failures, or its, huge bribery and corruption scandal in Mexico, right? So, I think these are good questions, and what people know about companies is very limited. Most people are not reading the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times or Fortune magazine. And so a lot of what they know about companies is actually from word of mouth, as opposed to maybe these lists.
Okay, so where experience lacks maybe is where reputation matters. I don't know where that. So for the, a lot of these measures are about very well-known and high experienced companies. So it may, where these reputation scores are most applied are probably where they're least needed, I guess, is what I'm getting at. But anyway. All right.
Now people know only 6 things, but I see Rupert Younger with a hand and Charles Cho also with a hand.
Thanks. Yeah, the hands.
Rupert Younger first.
First of all, great to be on here. Thank you for everyone's views. The bit that I think I'd just throw into this debate, maybe it's helpful, is that I think it's important not to conflate numerical measurement with impact measurement. So we've just published a paper at Oxford in January, 11 co-authors in an attempt to try and reach some form of consensus. And probably achieve none of that, which is to try and identify in the context of purpose, not reputation, but same kind of idea, that the current measures of this social construct say, what's your purpose on one side, and then what's the value of purpose on the other side? It's that immediate numerical jump to a number. And we're arguing that there's a missing middle that needs to be focused on. And the missing middle is, what are the metrics that attach themselves to, in this instance, the purpose, but in your discussion, the reputations for and with. And they may be that employees find it a better place to work, or that customers think that there's a better set of intents and corporate character behind what people are doing. And all of those different dimensions may have different metrics, not numbers, but metrics. So I think the first thing is, I think that it's probably helpful to try and separate the question of measurement into two questions, which is, what are the metrics and what are the numbers? And as most of you will know from coming to Oxford for many years, I'm deeply skeptical that any of these ranking systems mean anything at all of any value. If you aggregate things into a number 6, and I think that's, John, you're just being far too modest. I'd give you at least a 6.5. So I think that anything that aggregates, a 10 on one side and a 0 on another and calls it 5 is just nonsense. And frankly, these rankings are there to sell things, not to provide insight. So anyway, just that sort of concept of numbers versus metrics, I'd just inject that into the discussion a bit. Thank you.
Thanks, Rupert. Could you post the link to that paper in the chat for everybody?
I'll post it on the chat now, yep.
Yes, and yes, it's the magic number 6, no longer the magic number 42, the meaning of life of everything, universe and everything. Charles Cho, go ahead.
Yes, hi. Full disclosure, I'm probably one of the few or only accountant in the room, but I love to come to these seminars. I want to go back to the example of Walmart again. I think Naomi, I don't mean to pound it, but Walmart is, as you know, more powerful than some countries combined, right? So whatever the reputation they're gonna get, bad employees, whatever, pay taxes, not pay taxes. I mean, does anybody can get away with Walmart? People are attracted by going to buy cheap stuff. They're probably aware that employees, and there's a reason why it's cheap, because of course they pay the employee very low. They probably have very bad supply chain management, all this unethical stuff. Still, they're thriving, right? They're thriving. Amazon is the same thing. We know they don't pay taxes in Europe. There's a report that, soaring report. Do the people stop buying from Amazon because they have a perception of reputation Amazon is bad, that Jeff Bezos is richer than some countries too? No. So at the end of the day, I think that reputations, the boycott, whatever boycott is, it's completely symbolic. Just like rankings are, like reputation rankings are. So it's sort of more comment than that, but I think that some of these huge firms who are again more powerful than countries have nothing to fear. They don't care about this, right? So that's just my 2 cents.
No, I think that's a great comment. I mean, in my international management class, we talked about how large companies are and how powerful they are. And I believe that Walmart's revenue is greater than about, I have to double check, but it's about 25 countries' GDP. So you're absolutely right. I mean, they're so powerful.
Just to give you an example, I got my COVID vaccine at a Walmart pharmacy. Do you think that I wanted to go there? But no, I had no choice. Okay, so that was the only available. I hated to go to this Toronto, whatever, Mississauga Walmart, but I went because that was the only choice, and they have the most vaccines available at the time. So there you go.
Okay, is there anything else that you guys want to address, or that I don't see any more hands? I'm glad to go back to kind of the norms discussion or even the embeddedness discussion.
Mike, let's talk about and David, you can pipe in here too, because I loved it, the Joan Jett quote. I don't give a damn about my bad reputation, right? Tom Roulette has a new book about kind of the power of being divisive and how kind of bad reputations can actually be leveraged in many ways to create at least personal value for the organization or the individual. Of course, I think we see this maybe in a different context in politics, often kind of positioning yourself as the counter or the opposite from a reputational perspective works, right? The Trump phenomenon, I think, highlights that well. And so that's something I've always personally wondered about is the motivation to be number one or to be on top versus the motivation to be something different. And David, I know you've done a lot of research on distinctness versus being normative, or even the power of being number two or just being different. I think is really important to think about when you think about the influence of reputation, the outcomes of reputation, as opposed to just stock price, for example. Attracting new customers, new followers, whatever it might be.
I mean, if it's a cost benefit thing, there are costs to doing the things that make you highly reputed that may not outweigh whatever benefits you get from them. Yeah. And, Amazon is just doing all right, despite pissing off a lot of people. Same with Walmart. But, could they do better if they invested more in these things? They couldn't break into Manhattan, for example, because of bad reputation, right? So maybe there is something to it, but how can we make that a more pointed question? What are you trying to sort out?
I don't know. I just throwing it out there for the group. I see a couple hands. Angie was first. I don't know if it's about this, but
Angie Fairchild.
Yes, my question is related to something that Rupert brought up in his question. It seems that we can agree that we have many different potential measures of reputation based on the person who is measuring reputation and also the domain over which they're assessing their reputation, and that so much of this debate centers around poorly executed attempts to aggregate across all of those dimensions. So does that imply to you that we should just give up on aggregation and become okay with conducting research that looks at only one of those dimensions? Or should we instead be looking for a better aggregation rule or process?
I think there's room for both. I do think a lot of the questions we talk about they're more specific, and so they do need the specific dimensional type reputation measures. So I do think a big problem, the misspecification or some of the issues that Naomi brought up in her excellent presentation in terms of using the wrong measure for that doesn't really relate exactly to what you're testing is a problem. And I think, and there are more specific measures out there. And if there's not a more specific measure out there, maybe you need to develop a new one. But there's quite a lot of, the RepTrak has 7 dimensions, the Harris, they have 6 dimensions, and there's lots of other measures out there that can be used to, indicate specific things. I think the key is, what's your theory? What are you trying to test? And then when you figure out, what you're actually trying to theorize and what you want to know, I think this should dictate the measure you use. I think a lot of the reputation literature just started with the fact that fortune was out there and available. And for a long time, all that was available. And so they tried to fit that measure into all these different types of pots. And it wasn't a perfect fit for most pots. It was close enough that it could get it did get a lot of results, but they weren't specific, they weren't exact. They were close enough to get some kind of statistical significance, but they really weren't capturing exactly what the researcher wanted.
I want to bridge a couple of different comments that we've had about whether or not small companies can have reputations and some of these issues. And many local communities have awards for their local businesses, right? The best pizza, the best coffee shop, the best dry cleaner, right? And okay, often these are produced by the local newspapers. I admit it, they're usually driven by the local media or maybe the Chamber of Commerce. But there are, some of these localized measures, and it could be that we have research questions where we don't need to rely on some of the national data, that we could look more at the community level and therefore really enrich our understanding of the appeal to different companies. I think a lot of these are consumer oriented, but it could give us more insight into some of these measurement questions and what people value.
And we had this debate a few years back at Oxford, on the notion of kind of having an aggregated measure and its merits. And I won the debate, so I know it's right. That we had, the aggregate measure. Did I beat you, Bundy, or were you on my side that time? I don't remember, but the notion that, the top business in an area, the best business school, a top 10 business school, whatever, even though there's lots of things that go into that, and some of those things may be very negative, just having that ranking is something that serves as a useful heuristic and does sway behavior toward an organization. Whether it's bad or good, and it's mostly bad, we know that it does the work that serves that purpose. I want to go back to the Rupert then, or I'll leave it to you, Dan.
So I was just going to add one thing on the I mean, Mike, I agree. Of course, these aggregate measures do have impact, because when you put a ranking up and something's number one, it's an impact thing. Of course it does, but I'm not sure it has any real validity. The one thing which I think, the one caveat where I think these aggregate measures perhaps do have some validity, I think, is if you replace reputation with sentiment. If we think about the concept of sentiment, then I think then I think you might be able to get away with some form of aggregation and make it stick. But sentiment and reputation are very different things, right? They're very different things. And then on the other question, which I just add a big chunk of our work at Oxford has been focused on trying to answer indirectly the question about Walmart and why we go to Walmart if we don't like what they stand for, but they happen to do vaccinations. And it's this, what I call the Janus face of reputation, this idea that there's two dimensions, absolutely critical dimensions of reputation, which are perceptions of capability and perceptions of character. And that you can quite happily have two very, very opposing and different views of an organization based on your perceptions of their capability. You might think an organization is highly capable and it does what it says on the tin, but you might hate what it stands for and not like its character. And that's entirely possible and reasonable and natural and human. The nice thing about this are the two bits of insight that flow from that, from the work that we've done, which is that, first of all, capability reputations are remarkably sticky. They don't actually change much over time. You've got to really work hard to undermine a reputation for being capable at something. So that's the first thing, whereas character is much more volatile. You can be a hero and then a zero within the same day almost. But perhaps the more interesting observation is it matters to different people to answer this reputations for something with someone question, which I'm a full Bundyist. I'm a Bundyite, or whatever the phrase might be on this one, which is this idea of multiple reputations for something with someone. Couldn't have put it better, John. But the idea that it matters to different people, I think, is quite important. And the research seems to show that capability reputations matter more to customers, whereas character reputations matter more to counterparties. And by counterparties, I mean suppliers, investors, regulators, employees. And it sort of makes sense, because if you're a customer, you're buying a product, let's say. So you're buying the utility of something, and that's really about whether you think it's a good car, good service, good, high quality shirt, I don't know, whatever the product is. Whereas if you're a supplier, an employee, a regulator, or an investor, you're in a relationship. And then your character becomes a heuristic as to what can I expect of my interactions with them, with this organization, based on perceptions of what I think they've done in the past. That's the definition I use around reputation. So just an observation that that capability and character is quite a helpful sort of analytical tool, and then it has some valuable things attached to it, such as the for and with and the volatility questions.
Corporate character is a separate construct, and people develop measures for that. I mean, I'm just being kind of facetious.
Yeah, well, I mean, but that would fit, right? That would fit.
Right, there's a strand of research, I think more marketing oriented, about corporate character.
And that would fit the idea of multiple measurements, right, rather than aggregation, because you can have a great set of, I mean, you can look at the trust literature, which is focused on ABI, ability, benevolence, and integrity, and you can think that capability and character might have similar dimensions on reputation. So there's lots of different ways, and I completely agree, Naomi. I mean, you're the expert on measurement. I don't know why I'm even trying to do battle with you here, but but you can have different measurements for these different dimensions. Absolutely.
Well, I mean, there's an inherent conundrum here where, as you get multi-layered and trying to measure reputation, you also lose the value of messing with reputation because it's supposed to be a heuristic. It's not supposed to be a complete representation of all activity, or it's no good. It's like, I think the example I used was a full-size map of the US doesn't do you any good. Charles, you want to make one more quick comment?
Yes, a very quick question or comment about maybe the granularity of these reputation measures. We hear a lot of most admire firms. Sounds very aggregate and umbrella for me. Then we talk about what's the best firms to work for. And then the one I put on a chat and I used was the environmental reputation. So some of them reputation measure can be maybe a little bit more specific. Are there a community, is it a best community engaged partner organization or something like that in terms of CSR or others? I don't know if that can be sort of separated more granularly. Of course, Newsweek, as I mentioned, 2009 put the first thing, and every year they change methods. So I sort of gave up on this. But I'm wondering if this reputation measure, it's too much of a aggregation, sort of like these new ESG ratings where they just put everything together instead of looking at things more granularly. So.
I mean, I think everybody here would agree with the point that, I think, these more specific measures matter, right? And the more specific you can get the measure to the decision being made, I think you're absolutely right, Charles. And I think Jonathan and Naomi and David and Mike, I think have all said something. The more specific you get to the measure, the more you're going to, the information is going to be useful. The reputation is going to be useful. And so I think, I think the thing is, there comes a point where you can't have a reputation for everything. I mean, you can, but people also have very defined cognitive limits of how much information they can process and how many reputations they can process, and and sometimes you just need the overall feel, and sometimes you need the more specific information. And I might just add to it's kind of tied to Rupert's comment before and some of the other ones. Reputation's only one piece of the puzzle so if I go to Walmart, I know all the things about the supply chain issues, the employment issues, but I'm a consumer in the work. I also know I only have so much budget, and I only have so much time, and if I want to spend the effort to find the store that has the mom and pop store that has a better reputation that treats me, and sometimes I will do that. But sometimes I also have limited capacities, and I also have other factors that I have to consider besides reputation. They're going to influence my behavior, and often these are how much money do I have and how much time do I have, and other types of resource issues that are driving behavior, as well as reputation. So it is one piece of the bigger picture.
So we've run out of time. What I'll do is I'll give my little closing spiel, and then we'll turn off the recording. And those of you who want to stick around, you're welcome to stick around, and we can continue until we run out of steam or available time. But let me just close this out real quick. And let me just begin by a sincere thanks to the panelists for a very great debate. Thank you very much. Many thanks to all of you for participating. As a reminder, the materials from today's session will be posted online very soon. We'll send notice to all registered attendees, and you can find links on the RICSI website, which you'll find at business.rutgers.edu/RICSI. Please note that I've set up a Twitter account to use for refinements of any research questions. The Twitter handle is @research_better. The title is Better Management Research Questions. If you'd like to write a brief summary of any quasi seminar that we'll post then on the RIXI website, please get in touch with me. Another thing to look out for is the summer 2022 special issue of Rutgers Business Review. It'll be focused on this seminar series. Most of the presenters have agreed to write pieces for it that summarize and extend their debates. In addition, you might be interested in a call for papers for a special issue of Journal of Business Ethics titled Save Our Cities, exploring the intersection of ethics, diversity and inclusion, and social innovation in revitalizing urban environments. Ted Baker, Brett Gilbert, Kareem Post, Jeff Robinson, and I are the guest editors, with initial drafts due on January 17th, 2022. In addition, if you're interested in helping to create the next generation of business faculty, please visit mcnairbusinessscholars.org. Please sign up to be a mentor. Finally, please do join us for the 2021-2022 Quasi Seminar Series. On September 17th, we debate the question, are corporate win-win strategies an effective way of alleviating social and environmental problems? That session is going to feature Mark Kramer, Andy King, Irene Henriquez, and Auden Schindler. Hope to see you there. Have a great summer in the meantime. Deb, if you can kill the recording so we can talk honestly now.